Hello, folks. Welcome to our last talk for this weekend's art show, and we have Murriel Grace here, who's going to has some really fantastic slides to show, and I'm sure equally awesome stories to go with them. All right, take it away, Murriel.
All right, thank you, Barb, and thanks everybody for not leaving the show early to beat traffic on a Sunday night. It's awesome to be here. And I am going to be doing a talk on art in protest, or the art of protest. It's going to be a sort of brief and not comprehensive look. And I use all of these terms very loosely as far as just defining and describing like what is art or what is protest, because there are a lot of things that go into this. And this is something that's been very much part of the common vocabulary of our lives, especially in the past couple of years, but it's also something that has been part of our history for a very, very long time before that. So this was part of just my exploration and interest in this. And as I started, I found that there were many deep roads that this had taken me down through. So I didn't get a chance to cover everything I wanted, but there's everything from like painting and performance to public theater, street art, music, all wrapped up into what you can consider protest, what you can consider art. I'm not really going to answer all of those questions, but we are going to just take a look at all of this. Also, political art is not necessarily protest art, but I don't really distinguish too much between that here either. A few disclaimers as I go. This is kind of a meandering look, so they're sort of thematically grouped, but mostly out of order, just kind of as a function of the time that I had to do all of this. But it is something I want to expand out into a little bit more of a cohesive story in the future. And like I mentioned, I don't claim any expertise or insight in particular. This was something I just found very interesting. Another last disclaimer note, there may be some triggers for uncensored language in art, and I did do attributions where possible, but I'm going to also have to retroactively add a couple of those later. I'm going to keep going. So if we start looking back just, historically at some protest art, as you may see and recognize this famous 1937 mural, which was Picasso's Guernica. And this was a really major piece of art that was looking at the Spanish Civil War when the fascists were basically bombing tons of civilians in Spain in this really super bloody and brutal war. It was something that he hadn't intended to paint for this exhibition. He was going to do something else that I think involved the nude women, but he, when hearing about the bombing, just felt so moved and put this together. And it was really definitive just in the art world and also in his life. And it was part of the story of just the nationalists and the fascists backed by Franco, Mussolini, and Nazi Germany versus the leftists, which are allied with the anarchists, the communists, and the unions and the working class. It was a difficult war. And so I'll stop here. It's a story that I feel like has been repeating, and unfortunately at the time, the nationalists were the ones that won. And so just continuing to look at what protest art looks like. It's very different. Like this is another piece by Ai Weiwei. It's showing in Los Angeles, and it's also a little bit, just when you look at it originally, people have different reactions. When I first saw it, I thought this was really just hard to wrap my head around or understand. It's this huge field of sunflower seeds, and the others are spouts. And he was known as a dissident in China, and as a lot of political artists had faced things like jail time and persecution and other things due to his art and due to being an activist. He grew up in China, lived under harsh conditions. His dad was exiled. He's been openly critical of the Chinese government. This documentary, Cockroach, was looking at just the issue that came out recently, and was looking at Hong Kong and was very critical of just everything that was happening geopolitically. So here is the picture of all of these spouts, teapot spouts. that were just ancient, and it was really looking at just this whole idea of the individual and society and China and so on, and it was his personal expression. So I will continue on. This is also just looking at a ton of art throughout history, because we had art that was really strong images with everything from, you know, the Stonewall and the formation of the Gay Liberation Front, protests against the Vietnam War, protests around what museums could and couldn't show as art, things like Japanese internment camps. Like, all of these images were things that were used throughout history to be able to get these messages out to people, and also just this expression of some really painful things that were happening. So also looking back, and we're still kind of back in the past, not so much in you know, our immediate common day right now, but there are certain artists, like street and political art. Political art has been really wrapped up in street art and kind of this world of, you know, graffiti and renegade artists as well. And so you might recognize these pretty iconic images of Shepard Fairey and Banksy, who, I mean, have been criticized for certain things, but have also been really out in the community as both philanthropists. They've done a lot of activist work, donations to different causes, and they've moved a lot of people just based on the pieces that they put together. So here are some other images by these two women that were also creating a lot of works of protest. Tania Bruguera, who is a Cuban installation and performance artist. You can see her piece here on the left called Sunflowers. And then these two other pieces on the right, which were by Fabiana Rodriguez, and they were also making these statements just about immigration and what human life means. So we're gonna come in now to just some of the art that's been created recently. At the top, this huge mural was painted on the streets in Minneapolis. You know, there's been a lot of art that has come up around the Black Lives Movement, Black Lives Matter, through the protests over the summer. These two pieces down here are in Long Beach. And there's also just been a lot of these different efforts now to collect this art, which is, some of it is street art, some of them are murals, a lot of it is ephemeral by nature, but galleries now are trying to collect these and save these and preserve these as part of history. The Downtown Long Beach Alliance has actually been going out to some of the businesses to collect, you know, they were the wood blocks that covered their buildings and windows to be able to protect the shops and so on. And there's now this effort to be able to collect these so that we can preserve them historically for the future. And also in Minneapolis, there's a protest art collection, which is looking to be the largest of its kind now. I think working in conjunction with just the community to be able to collect a lot of these plywood murals. There's this movement, Save the Boards, to memorialize the movement. Just another look at a few other galleries that have now been collecting pieces, or galleries, but also books that have been coming out to be able to collect this visual history of protest art in America. There's also this really interesting project. Here's the link, georgefloydstreetart.omeka.net. And it's looking at being this sort of urban art mapping project of both, it's fully the urban art mapping George Floyd and anti-racist street art database, which is just looking to document street art, but also map it so people can go in and actually submit on this map so that you can have this sort of picture of different pieces. It's just community submitted, but also because all of that meta info is available, it's something that people could use for the future for, you know, research and for being able to just sort of preserve this moment in time. So here is just kind of a look at if we're considering also another part of this sort of very loose art form as the signs and messages that have been created. So there are some images here of both modern and historical protest signs. And, nowadays it's not just, the Socialist Times or maybe independent outlets that are covering this. You have Marie Claire and Good Housekeeping that are also writing articles about the perfect protest signs or the art of, the protest. So here is just another one that's just kind of looking at this history of our civil rights movement. So something that I wanted to spend a little bit of time on also, and there have been various stories around this idea of the raised fist, which has now become this really big icon of the movement, both Black Lives Matter, the feminist movement, and it's really been around historically for a while since, earliest we've heard is early 1900s. There was a print shop in Mexico, Taller de Gráfica Popular, that basically was using art to advance social causes. And most of that iconic image that you see of the fist was uncredited and was from an artist and activist named Frank Ciorca, who had made this image for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And it was then kind of co-opted and reused by the Students for a Democratic Society and the Black Power movement. So here are also some images. This painting, this photo of this painting was circulating around for a while as well. That was from the 1860s. And this image was really taken particularly by liberals, by leftists, by people that were fighting these causes. And you can see in the modern day, we have various incarnations of that fist that have been used for different causes. Of course, consider it art or not, the raised fist emoji, which is this Unicode character over here, was actually released in 2010. And there have actually been emoji graph studies, which I found was really interesting, that were looking at just the incidences of this use, particularly looking at the correlation with certain hashtags and so on, like Black Lives Matter, resistance, protest, and so on. So part of the question is, and that's something, like I said, I don't feel like is really my place to answer or say, but now with this idea of being able to have and spread the message in a certain way, we have things like this where it's sort of this idea of being able to easily repeat, reuse, and sort of commodify this message. Like you could see here, this vector image where, your protest text can go here. And I mean, there are a lot of buzzwords and vocabulary around this, and this whole idea of performative activism and the way that we demonstrate our protests. So there is a quote kind of from the psychotherapist, Sirot Chawla, that was talking about allyship motivated by optics versus authentic allyship. But at the end of it, is this movement and a lot of the ideology around protest can be co-opted by advertising, by branding, by corporate, in different ways, reused. Whether this is a good or bad thing, like I said, I'm not one to say if it's problematic or not, because at the end of it, will it help to contribute to advocacy and awareness if there is this sort of vocal message rather than silence? It's sort of the idea of like lip service versus being able to at least say that we're all kind of together supporting a common cause. So to kind of add to this sort of complicated idea of, advocacy, protest, awareness, just the performative nature of social media in general, is that this is an article and an infographic by Yes magazine, which was looking into some research about the tipping point for social change, which according to this is 25%. And so part of this motivation and this movement behind creating social change is the social pressure for social change, which is in part formed by things like the media, things like traditional media and social media. And I mean, to some extent also this sort of Instagramification of these movements. But overall, what we're looking at here is now this sort of trend where, you know, things are sort of moving towards critical mass. And as soon as enough voices weighed in part fueled by this ability to sort of share and reshare images and icons that we stand behind, it kind of contribute to this critical mass happening. So this is a little bit more of just political art in general rather than straight protest art. But another thing that you know, I wanted to show is just this art behind the campaign, and you've likely seen a lot of these iconic images. Just part of the strength of getting a lot of attention with one because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was running on such sort of a great message, but in addition, you know, she had this really iconic branding that was created through this New York-based creative firm called Tandem that designed and created this sort of brand and this message that really spoke to people. And the similar thing happened around Obama's campaign, where Shepard Fairey, who we talked about earlier, had also created just these really iconic images around Obama. And you can see this second image, which he also created, was around when just he was looking at the Occupy movement, and he was also sort of just disillusioned by some things that were happening. So these were just some other images and icons from that campaign. And Tandem in general as an agency was just looking at some of the principles behind it is being able to take these same techniques from marketing and advertising, but using them to create images and icons that can be advanced for the greater good. So it's sort of like this crossover between, you know, art, media, what, like I mentioned, what you can and can't call art. And at the end of it, can anyone say what you can or can't call art? This is another really iconic image that's been going around, you know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. This was created in 2013 or coined through this blog or through this Tumblr that was created by an NYU student, Shauna Kinzik, and had just become sort of this sort of rallying cry for a lot of people, and this image that a lot of people could stand behind. So when we're looking at political art and icons, this also happens on both sides. You know, this is like a very recognizable icon that a great body of people stood behind. Lesser known, which I actually hadn't been familiar with on the bottom, is what before they realized what a bad idea it would be, was going to be like one of the icons of the Trump-Pence campaign. But yeah, that went through before until it got out into the world and people told me like that was just not a good idea. But also just looking at you know, the ideological art that was created that became sort of this rallying cry, or this idea of this creating these cults of personality around these leaders. You know, the propaganda machines have taken these images from, you know, Spain, where you can see Franco at the bottom, you know, Italy and Germany, and they've had all of these kind of images, propaganda posters, and so on that have been used to be able to kind of build public opinion and public support around this whole cult of personality. This is another thing that has also gotten a lot of attention and has been around for a while, like the Guy Fawkes mask, which, as you may know, Guy Fawkes was one of the coordinators of the gunpowder plot to blow up the House of Lords in the 1600s. The popular version of that mask was stylized through, David Lloyd and Alan Moore through V for Vendetta, and has been largely adopted by, the anonymous movement, Occupy movement, other sort of anti-establishment movements. So so another really big part of protest art, I think, just historically and not just in our modern times, is this idea of protest and performance. This was a clip from Un Violador en Tu Camino, which was performed by group Las Tesis, and it was really a sort of song/chant against violence against women. It had been performed in various places, particularly for the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. It just kind of spread, especially during different trials, such as Weinstein's trial and so on. So this whole idea of just like kind of guerrilla theater, if you probably noticed in the background, the famous lamps of LACMA. So other performance artists, and like I mentioned, especially with the line between art and activism, the artists often face things like, jail and or worse because of what they're doing. And so this is the performance group Pussy Riot from Russia, who has done everything from, the churches, the World Cup, and a lot of other of really, I guess, radical, if you could say, performance art pieces. This is Guerrilla Girls, who has also been around since, I want to say, the 1980s or so, doing a lot of pieces, some gallery-based, but also a lot of just sort of outdoor performance guerrilla pieces. They formed just around this idea of bringing more gender and racial inequality awareness, especially within the arts community. To continue, there is this idea from Hakim Bey, who is kind of a problematic person in his own right, an American anarchist author and poet from the 1940s. And his one of the ideas that came out of this essay he did on the temporary autonomous zone is about art is crime and crime is art. And there were a lot of different movements that kind of came out of this, including the San Francisco's Cacophony Society, which, the co-founders of whom went on to, the Burning Man world, and this idea of having this, like these sort of subversive acts of art and kind of culture jamming that happen. And this really started to crest in like the 1980s. So here are some other billboards that were kind of part of this sort of guerrilla communication culture jamming, pieces by like the Billboard Liberation Front. And there were some other groups like Australia's billboards utilizing graffitists against unhealthy promotions. And there's some other groups too that do these acts of brandalism, as they call it, but basically going through and creatively altering and or enhancing billboards with slightly different messages. All right, to continue, and this is where I started to run out of time, just being able to include some, I mean, gosh, this is another road where, you know, you could spend an entire talk just looking at some of the pieces, looking at just feminist arts, gender rights, you know, protests, and especially coming out of Stonewall. There were, and a lot of these images that were happening like right around the height of the AIDS epidemic. Yeah, there are a ton of pieces here. And this one I think is particularly moving with Kevin, and I have trouble pronouncing his last name, but who had, you know, gone to just really great extremes with his performance art. All right, so, and I'm coming close to the end. Another place where, you know, creating becomes kind of an act of defiance is in sort of the fibercraft communities. You have groups like Sewing Rebellion, which is really aligned with campaigns like related to just support of labor, yarn bombing groups, which will go out and do these sort of guerrilla acts of, you know, improving the landscape with yarn. This was a piece that they did outside of, you know, a museum or an art space in Los Angeles. There's Knit the City, which is another graffiti knitting and crochet group. We'll skip photography. Music is another area that you could spend, I mean, days on just looking at the history of protest music throughout time. Like here are just a few pieces of some well-known ones that are out there. Even just looking on there, I was checking on Spotify and they had a ton of playlists that were just sort of these collections of protest music as well. Some modern, some more classical. It's kind of everything across the board. And looking at, you know, like Fiona Apple, we don't want your tiny hands anywhere near our underpants. You know, and another statement was through Against Me in their song White People for Peace. Protest songs in response to military aggression try to stop the soldier's gun, but the battle raged on, which was more of a comment against, you know, looking at, you know, the role of protest in sort of this art form when it's only backed by that, you know. And I think as part of just this whole reflection is looking at, you know, there's the creation of the art, but also what happens after that as part of the act of protest, as part of, you know, what the end goal is and what we want to be able to achieve through our protest, you know, which is like social change and, you know, a ton of other things. All right, so just to kind of close out with everything, this is another world that I wish I could spend a ton of time on. The zine culture is just so embedded in this idea of the art of protest. It was kind of this early means of really democratizing publication. You know, before it was a lot more accessible to be able to create and distribute and disseminate content. Like zines were this way that you could, with, you know, a typewriter or sheets of paper, a stapler, and a pencil, be able to get a message out to a ton of people. Oh, and so this is just one local zine that has chapters in Los Angeles and a few other places. Free Radicals, they do a lot of pieces around science, and also have one in particular against stopping LAPD spying and looking at just a lot of these local movements and contributing to the local community. So I wanted to call them out specifically. And I think I didn't think I was going to take up the entire time, but I'm finishing right on time. This is sort of the end, but it was part of just a collection of this body of work that I hope to continue, because there is so much more that is part of this, you know, and so much more that, you know, I think historically is really interesting as far as this sort of narrative of the art that's been created around protest and around being able to make a statement. So thank you again for listening to me ramble. I really appreciate it. This is, I think, the last talk of the day, so go and enjoy your Gather Art Gallery. And I think I hand it over to Barb from here.
Yeah, well, no, that was great. Thanks so much, Muriel. That was really, really fascinating. And I always love when there's something I get to learn about. So yeah, thanks for sharing your knowledge and this great compilation of protest art and highlighting a lot of things that, you know, some of us may have known some about and some of us may not have known. I think it's pretty interesting. We've actually got some of the some yarn bombing folks involved in the show as well. Cool. So it's pretty, yeah, it's fun seeing these kind of connections as well. I'm curious now about like how like your interest kind of came about in this, because clearly you were extremely passionate about about all of this. Like,
gosh, you know, I guess it's something that I've always been sort of in and out of, just as far as interest goes. Like Guerrilla Girls, for example, in, I want to say college, I was webmaster for them for like a couple years, which just ended up being this random, I don't even remember how I first got started with all of that. Mm-hmm. And I think now especially it's, and I feel like people go through, or maybe I should speak for myself, you know, you kind of go through these waves of engagement, right? Mm-hmm. It's like there's some other song. It's like when you were young, you wanted to set the world on fire, right? And it's mm-hmm. like there's this part of when you're sort of idealistic and you're like, we can make a change in the world, and then it sort of turns into like, man, everything's gone to shit, you know. And I think especially lately, there has been this sort of renewed interest in engagement and almost critical mass around people really wanting to get in and help. And there have been all of these different social movements throughout time where things got to a point where like we couldn't stay quiet because we knew it was so bad and things were impacting people's lives. And this whole idea, I think, of now how, because we have all of these new and weird forms of media, and these new and weird forms of interacting with the world, with just mm-hmm. the way that we engage and the things that we do on social. And just looking at this idea of how, you know, how does that and these forms of, you know, of art or of messaging or of, you know, posting things online translate into us being able to mobilize change, you know, or us being able to move and reach people. So it's just something that I think I wanted to, especially when I was looking at just this art show and thinking about the art world in general. I was thinking about, well, how to be able to take a look at that and just sort of explore that a little bit more. And so I guess that's just where I ended up here now, you know. Especially when it's like you can, I don't know, I just find it's kind of interesting and funny where you can say, all right, well, there's, you know, and there were a series of, you know, like every weekend, you know, there would be another protest or something in the summertime, or there would be something to be engaged with, which, I mean, was just a sign of people really wanting to be able to have their voices heard. But also it's kind of interesting because it's like, well, you can, you know, download your poster here, you know, or like, mm-hmm. here's your like top 10 best pieces of, you know, protest art, or like how to rock a great, you know, sign, which is kind of funny, but it's like, if that is the message that will speak to people, and if that is the thing that might be able to get somebody more engaged, then I guess who am I to, you know, who am I to say that's bad, regardless of whether it's like, well, all these new people that are flooding in to be engaged that weren't before. It's like, there's no, I guess, just this idea of like, there shouldn't be any gatekeeping. And if there are things that bring people in more than others, then it should be fine. Like, you know, that's okay. So yeah. I don't know if that fully answered the question. I was kind of rambling.
No, but, you know. No, it's great. Yeah. No, I really appreciate that.
Okay, sorry, I might.
This is a yeah. No, this is a wonderful, like, you know, inspiring way to end our Sunday. I love it.
Cool. Yeah, I was like, I'm just kind of rambling for a little bit.
No. This is. I love it. It's great. but yeah, we were talking earlier about, you know, some of the possibilities of, you know, maybe someday or at some point when we're able to, you know, doing some kind of workshops, like in the gallery with around protest art and signs and zines and all kinds of stuff like that, which I think is fabulous. I think that'd be wonderful.
Totally. It's almost
Yeah.
like if and this is going to be maybe a funny analogy. It's like if an Instagram post or a retweet can be a gateway drug for somebody to kickstart their social engagement, but also if that thread continues and get pulled along to somebody then showing up, or somebody then writing a letter to a senator, or somebody then like making a phone call, or you know, donating to a community group or showing up in a different way, then, you know, as long as that continues, and as long as that just doesn't go away when it becomes inconvenient or uncomfortable to do that, then I think that's the stuff that's important.
Yeah, I think some of it's like where is the communication happening? Like where is the conversation? And especially like just in the like recent history of like technology kind of starting to take off, and we're still in the infancy of that, but like social media, and especially in the last year where everybody's online habits have changed wildly, and you know, all of their socializing habits have changed a lot. Like it is fascinating to think about like where all that goes. Yeah. But so yeah, if for those who are in the gallery, in the Art Happens gallery, if you haven't yet, Murriel did actually design 3 of the rooms here. If you go out where the garden is, the patio, the garden, and the roof are all Murriel's work there. There's a really interesting exquisite corpse kind of a spin-off situation up on the roof where you can contribute to stories that have been begun, and some folks have done that. But you can join and do that as well. And then I think the space is going to keep growing and changing. And I think that some of those spaces might, you know, kind of grow and continue to modify as well.
Yeah, well, and thank you for trusting me to, you know, have license to build out a couple rooms.
No, it's great. I want to get all the people doing it. All the everybody building the gallery. That's the dream.
Totally. No, I had a lot of fun, and it's one of those things too that was a work in progress of all of these ideas of what else to add, and then, you know, at some point, time just becomes your forcing function of saying, all right, well, I gotta finish and just put whatever I need to out there because we're out of time.
Yep. What is the minimum viable product? What can we get out there first? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally. All right. Well, great. So thank you again for this talk. Thank you everybody for coming to the art show. Feel free, hang out, go to the dance floor, go check out the garden and the patio and the roof and all of that. And we'll be partying there, and the space is going to stay open after this weekend. So folks can keep coming on back and checking things out. And yeah, thank you so much for everybody who helped make this happen. All right. Bye.
Bye.